Good afternoon, sisters and brothers, comrades and friends. How are we feeling today?
Good.
Feeling good?
Yeah.
I like a little bit of energy, a little bit of optimism coming my way. Well, props to Carlos for that excellent speech. Unfortunately, he's taken about a quarter of my presentation. That's what happens when you're ideologically on par with somebody, I guess. But as many of you may be able to figure out, I'm not from here. I'm actually from New York City. And, over the past several years, I've been active with what's considered to be anti-war activism. But I don't consider myself merely an anti-war activist because I think it's actually quite easy and at times almost fashionable to proclaim yourself to be anti-war. But when it comes to pacifism, it's not something that I agree with whatsoever because I will unconditionally support the liberation struggles of oppressed people around the world. And that includes understanding that those people have the right to resist their colonizers and their oppressors by any means necessary. So when it comes to wars of national liberation, I stand decisively with those people in their struggles. And that means the people of the DPRK with the right to self-defense in their situation in which half of the Korean Peninsula is occupied by the United States, by my government. Now, Carlos mentioned a number of things about the connections between the Black Liberation Movement in the U.S. and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And I know we have some other fantastic speakers who are going to touch more on the dynamics of that later. But what I will say, when trying to organize in the streets of New York City, for example, you come across this demonization campaign that is so vile, that's so strong, that's so racist, that tries to paint North Korea as the most absurd, most insane, most closed place on the face of the planet. Now, I actually had the opportunity to visit the Democratic People's Republic of Korea earlier this year. And what I want to do is to give a little bit of an eyewitness report from that trip, because I've been to quite a few countries in my travels. And working for 2 years as a journalist, I think last year I was on something like 70 planes, zigzagging from Latin America to Africa to Asia to Europe, back to my hub, which was then New York City. But I've never been so impressed with any society that I've been to as much as I was impressed by what I witnessed in Pyongyang and throughout the rest of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And that's why it's such an honor that our Korean comrades are here with us tonight. Now, when you travel to the DPRK, and I hope that many of you are inspired after this to actually make that trip, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it will completely cleanse your mind from all of the nonsense that's been instilled in it, perhaps by this society. I mean, there's such an industry around the demonization of North Korea. I mean, to the extent that it's very difficult to even come across one or two book titles that are easy to recommend to people to try to get a more objective, more nuanced history of the country or the current situation there. I mean, I think even Zed Books, which is a relatively progressive publishing house, had put out a book earlier this year that was titled something like North Korea Undercover, or something like In the Secretive State. They all have these very fictionalized titles to them, as if you're reading some type of horror novel, that you're going to go inside this wretched, backwards place. So I went in April of this year for what was Kim Il-sung's birthday celebrations. And to travel there, you need to go through China. Now, I'll tell you, the mythology around Korea and the way that it's presented is such that if you fly on North Korea's national airline, which is Air Koryo, your experience, if you've read some of the stories about this airline that apparently is the only one-star airline in the world. Now, I've flown on quite a few airlines in my time, and I would have to say that if I had to give it a ranking, it would probably be at least a 3-star airline. I've been on several that are far worse than that. And it was a very smooth journey, a very easy journey. The the Koreans made you feel welcome from the very time you stepped foot on that plane. And arriving in Pyongyang, and I was with a group of, several Americans, several people from Britain. The Pyongyang Marathon was going on at this particular time. So it was the first time that it was open to foreign amateur runners. So there were Americans there who were just marathon fanatics who, they've obviously heard all of the propaganda around Korea and were a little bit nervous, a little bit standoffish. Like, are we going to be okay going through security, border control, all of that? Are we going to be looked at a certain way because we're American citizens? And I was able to catch up with them again after a few days that they had been there, and their impressions of the country were so drastically different from what they had expected. They said, from the time that we went up and showed our passports, they treated us like brothers and sisters. They didn't treat us as people from an enemy state. In fact, they said, we may have a problem with your government, but we have absolutely no problem whatsoever with the people of your country. And welcome to our country, and I hope that you enjoy your time here. And I think that everybody who was on that particular trip had a similar experience. Even if people didn't, go away convinced of the idea of socialism as a necessity in transforming the world, they were at least able to step back and say, you know what? The North Koreans are not these robots that they're presented to be. These are actually genuine human beings. Another point that really cannot be addressed enough is just how beautiful of a city Pyongyang is. Pyongyang, as Carlos alluded to, was essentially leveled in the Korean War, what they call the Fatherland Liberation War in the north of the country. There was not one building over 1 story tall that was remaining in 1953. And the US and the UN forces dropped more bombs in the north of the country than were used in the whole European theater of the Second World War. So I'll give you some sort of indication of the magnitude of the destruction of that country. Now, when you see Pyongyang today, I don't think you could possibly imagine a more beautiful city. It's literally spotless, to the point that on the 4th day, I think I made a joke with a friend of mine because I found a cigarette butt on the floor. And I said, oh, look, shit, it's a cigarette. It was like, and then I literally wanted to wait around to see how long it would be until somebody collected it, until they came around and picked it up. Because it's that kind of place. It's something that you can tell that it was built with a very different mentality on what actually benefits people. London, New York are very chaotic cities. I mean, that's an obvious point. But in the sense that you never quite feel at ease, at least I don't, unless I go off to a park somewhere. Now, Pyongyang is full of parks, but also just walking through the streets, people genuinely feel at ease. There's not this constant worry of the dog-eat-dog rat race. Everybody has the basics of life provided for, despite the fact that they're dealing with some incredible and very real economic problems, principally due to the sanctions, right, from the United States. And let's not forget, again, half of the country is literally occupied by U.S. imperialism. Every single year, the United States stages military drills off the coast where they literally simulate the carpet bombing of the country. Now, could you imagine for a second if the North Korean military had warships off the coast of Los Angeles or New York City, right?
One day.
It's incredible when you think about it. I remember last year when there was all this talk about, Kim Jong-un has said that he's going to attack the United States, and they presented maps on exactly where they're going to hit. And I was in Germany at the time, and I remember this elderly woman one morning said, oh, we're still here. I was like, well, what do you mean we're still here? It's like, oh, we haven't been hit by the North Koreans yet. But it's that type of completely unrealistic propaganda that people actually believe, right? the propaganda machine is so effective, and I've always said this, that the way that we're conditioned to think about their country says a great deal more about the effectiveness of our propaganda apparatuses than it does about so-called North Korean propaganda, right? And another point that I think is very important is this idea of the monolithic ideological system that exists in the DPRK, and how that doesn't translate to monolithic personality. Or as Che Guevara, I think he wrote an essay entitled "Individualism Must Disappear," or perhaps it was an excerpt from another speech of his. And this is always pounced upon by advocates of the most vile, form of capitalism in the planet, the bourgeoisie, to promote the idea that communists or socialists want to get rid of individuality, which is something quite different from individualism. But when they put this idea out there, they always link the two together as if to say they're the very same thing. Actually, I would argue that there's not that much individuality in capitalist society, because at the end of the day, you're constantly having to figure out a way to pay your bills, constantly having to bow down to the almighty dollar or the almighty Great British Pound to try to make your living. In Korea, what I witnessed was children with an extremely high cultural level, adults with an extremely high cultural level, because everybody has employment, and everybody has a place to live, and everybody has something to eat, and everybody has time, therefore, to engage in the type of activities that a lot of us may dream about when we're young, but when we get older, said, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that, I could have been a playwright, I'd really like to write a book one day, but I don't really have the time because I work a few jobs, and I'm looking after my kids. Things like this that are actually quite basic, despite the fact that the DPRK is a country that's struggling, they're still able to provide this very high level of cultural life for their people. And another manifestation of this is a place called the Grand People's Study House in Pyongyang, which is an enormous library. I can't remember exactly the number of books that that place contains, but many of you may know that Dennis Rodman, the NBA player, was in North Korea last year on a few different occasions, and I think earlier this year as well. And I thought, well, okay, we're able to talk about Dennis Rodman because all of the young people know him, and they're all very much into basketball now, it seemed like, on account of his visit. But when I went there and I asked what the most popular book was at the moment, they said it's the NBA Almanac, the most popular English book, that is, right? And when I asked what the most popular CD was in their music selection, they said it was a Linkin Park CD, right? Which I think would take a lot of people by surprise, really, that this supposedly extremely closed society that allows no form of dissent or deviance from Korean culture, that these people would have this advanced, place where they're able to get all of these spectacular resources. And it must be said again, all of the tabloid stories are false. And they're not even tabloid stories in this country or in the US. They put them in what's supposed to be newspapers that actually represent some form of journalistic integrity. You'll see these stories in the New York Times, for example. Just recently, of course, Kim Jong-un doesn't make an appearance for 5 or 6 weeks, and the rumor mill is going absolutely crazy. Does he have gout? Does he have this? Does he have that? Is he hoarding all of the food in the country? Just these absolutely absurd kind of slanders that, anybody who knows anything about Korea will be able to tell you it's nonsense. And I remember, I think it was the 3rd day of my trip, I was sitting down for dinner and I was speaking to another group that came from the United States, and they had talked about how they were just in Korea a few months beforehand and that they loved it so much they had to come back. And the sister who was there, she said, what really struck me on that first trip was the fact that we went to the opera, and then we sit down, and we look over and we say, isn't that Kim Jong-un's former girlfriend who's supposed to be dead? Apparently she was executed. They put it all over the Western press as if she had been killed by Marshal Kim Jong-un himself. I mean, the stories are endless. There was the one about every single Korean man under the age of 30 is going to have to get a haircut in the same style as the marshal. And I do have to say, when I, got to Pyongyang and left the airport, the first guy I saw did have that haircut. And I was like, oh shit, maybe it's true. But then I didn't see anybody else that entire trip with that cut. So I'll imagine that it just wasn't being implemented then. And now everyone has this Kim haircut, right? And one more thing, and I'll close on this actually, because I know that we have several other presentations that we have to get through. The notion that the DPRK is isolated. Well, when I was there were several exhibitions happening in which delegations from around the world would send flowers and send their regards. And you saw many dignitaries and diplomats from African countries. You saw the representatives of Russia, China, and the embassy of the state of Palestine, because Korea has been a fervent defender of the state of Palestine and a fervent opponent of the state of Israel for its entire existence. Korea has never recognized the state of Israel, and it will continue to uphold that principle. So the Palestinians have excellent relations with the Koreans. So when we go out and we, engage in Palestine solidarity, I think it would be very important that we keep in mind who else is engaging in Palestine solidarity on a much higher level, I would argue. So I would say, in conclusion, don't just take it from me. After all, you can visit a place and come back with a completely different point of view as myself. There have been loads of Westerners who have traveled to the DPRK and have come back and continue to write slanderous accounts because there's a lot of money in it. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to make some money, aren't we? But the principal thing to do is to stand with the people of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea the same way that the leadership in the DPRK stands with the people of Ferguson, Missouri. They've just recently decried the United States as the worst human rights abuser in the world. I stand with that report completely. I stand by my Korean comrades, and I stand by all oppressed people in the world. Thank you.